My breath caught in my throat the moment I pulled open the door of that sleek black Bentley and slid inside. "Airport, please hurry," I said without looking up, my fingers already scrolling through my phone to check my flight time. But when I finally glanced up, my heart stopped. This wasn't my rideshare driver. This man was something else entirely. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition, dark hair styled with precision, and those eyes piercing, intense, studying me like he'd been expecting this exact moment. "Who are you?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice as I reached for the door handle. But he only smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent ice down my spine. "Sit back, Jones," he said, speaking my name like he owned it, like he had every right to know who I was. My hand froze on the handle. This stranger knew my name. He knew exactly who I was. And he wasn't even remotely surprised to see me climbing into his car. I tried to steady myself, but my mind was racing through 1,000 possibilities. None of them good. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. I thought this was my ride." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," he interrupted, his deep voice carrying an authority that made my arguments die in my throat. "You were always meant to be here." He leaned forward slightly, adjusting something on the divider between us and the front seat, and the driver, a bald man with a vicious scar cutting across his jaw, silently started the engine. We began moving. My heartbeat thundered so loudly in my ears that I could barely think straight. "Stop! Let me out!" I nearly shouted, desperation bleeding through every syllable. But the man simply leaned closer, that dangerous smile still playing on his lips. "You and I need to have a conversation, Jones. Your brother, he did something that cost me a great deal. And now here you are." My world tilted sideways. My brother? Nelson? What had he done? I barely even talked to my brother. "I don't know anything about whatever." "Shh," he whispered, and somehow that single sound silenced me completely, as if he'd cast some kind of spell over my vocal cords. "You don't need to know the details. All that matters is that you're here now, with me, and you're not leaving until I decide what to do with you." My heart was pounding so hard it actually hurt, a physical ache spreading through my chest. This man, whoever he was, radiated danger, but when his gaze locked onto mine, there was something else lurking beneath the threat. Curiosity, interest, like I wasn't just a pawn in whatever game he was playing, like I was something more. "My name is Damon," he finally said, settling back into the leather seat as if we were having the most normal conversation in the world. "And you shouldn't be afraid of me, Jones. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already." He paused, his eyes boring into mine with such intensity that I couldn't look away even if I wanted to. "But I want you to understand something. Because of your brother's actions, your entire life just changed. Completely." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry as sand. I wanted to argue, to scream, to demand answers, but nothing came out. Damon turned to look out the window, and I watched the city lights blur past us like we were being transported to another dimension entirely. "You'll be staying with me, however long it takes for me to figure out exactly what you're worth." My entire body went numb. This was really happening. I'd gotten into the wrong car and somehow managed to destroy my entire life in one stupid mistake, and now I was trapped with a mafia boss who held my fate in his hands. The rest of the drive passed in suffocating silence. I kept stealing glances at Damon, trying to read his expression, trying to find any hint of mercy or humanity. But his face remained unreadable. He seemed lost in thought, occasionally checking his phone with quick, efficient movements that suggested he was coordinating something, probably my imprisonment. Every time we passed under a streetlight, the shadows played across his sharp features, making him look even more dangerous, more untouchable. When we finally stopped, my stomach dropped. We weren't at some sketchy warehouse or abandoned building like I'd feared. Instead, we pulled up to a luxury high-rise that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about billionaire lifestyles. The doorman nodded respectfully at Damon as we passed, not even sparing me a second glance, like terrified passengers were a regular occurrence. The elevator ride felt eternal, my reflection in the polished mirrors showing a pale, frightened version of myself I barely recognized. Damon remained silent beside me, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my head spin. When the elevator doors finally opened, we stepped into a penthouse that took my breath away despite my terror. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering city below. Modern art decorated the walls, and everything screamed wealth and power. This was Damon's world, and I was completely out of my depth. "Come," he said simply, his hand wrapping around my wrist, not painfully but firmly enough that I knew resistance was futile. He led me down a hallway and pushed open a door to reveal what would apparently be my prison. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in neutral tones with a massive bed that looked almost obscenely comfortable. The windows here offered the same stunning view, but I knew it was just a beautiful cage. "Don't even think about trying to escape, Jones. My security is everywhere, every exit, every window, every possible way out. I control all of it." He stepped back, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Regret? Doubt. But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "Get some rest," he said, his voice softer than before. "We'll talk more in the morning." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock sliding into place. I was alone, truly completely alone in this gilded cage with a man whose name I'd only just learned, whose intentions I couldn't begin to guess, and whose connection to my brother had somehow turned my entire world upside down. I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling with questions that had no answers. What had Nelson done? Why me? And most terrifying of all, what did Damon plan to do with me? The city lights twinkled below, beautiful and indifferent to my nightmare, and I realized with crushing certainty that my life as I knew it was over. Morning came without any real sleep. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind running through increasingly desperate escape scenarios that all ended with me getting caught. When pale sunlight finally filtered through those floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt hollow and exhausted, my body aching from tension. Then I heard it, the lock clicking open. My entire body went rigid as the door swung wide and Damon walked in carrying a breakfast tray like this was some twisted bed-and-breakfast situation. "You must be hungry," he said casually, setting the tray on the bedside table. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the room, and despite everything, my stomach growled traitorously. I turned my face away, refusing to acknowledge him or his offering. "Jones," he said my name again, and this time there was something almost gentle in his tone that made my skin prickle with confusion. "I know you're scared, but if you work with me instead of against me, I promise I won't harm you." I finally looked at him, anger surging through the fear. "Work with you? You kidnapped me and locked me in this room, and you expect cooperation? You're insane." The venom in my voice surprised even me. But I was done being passive, done being the victim in whatever sick game this was. He sighed heavily and sank into the chair near the window, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like he was about to explain something to a child. "Your brother stole from me, Jones. Not just pocket change, millions of dollars worth of merchandise that belonged to my organization. He thought he could vanish into thin air, start fresh somewhere with my money and my reputation in ruins. But," he paused, his jaw tightening with barely suppressed fury, "he was very wrong about that. Nobody steals from me and walks away. And since I can't touch him directly without starting a full-scale war with his associates, you became my leverage. So I'm bait," I said bitterly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My stomach churned with the realization that my brother's greed had put me in this nightmare. "Clever boy," Damon replied with a smirk. But the expression faded almost immediately. His features softened in a way that caught me completely off guard. "But perhaps, you're more than just bait. Your eyes, the way you carry yourself, there's something intriguing about you." I stared at him, genuinely confused. What does that mean? Nothing about this situation made sense anymore. Damon's fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest, his gaze never leaving my face. "You're not like what I expected, Jones. There's fear in your eyes. Yes, but there's also defiance. Spirit. Most people crumble when they're in your position, but you're still fighting. I find that compelling. People usually bore me within minutes, but you're different." Heat crept up my neck and into my cheeks. This dangerous, powerful man who'd kidnapped me was calling me intriguing like it was some kind of twisted compliment. "I'm not here for your entertainment," I snapped, my hands balling into fists against the expensive sheets. No, he agreed, standing and moving closer until he was towering over me. You're absolutely not. His hand reached out and caught my chin, his thumb tracing along my jawline with unexpected gentleness that made my breath stutter in my chest. But you are something, Jones, something special, and I'm going to figure out exactly what that is. Then he released me and walked out, the lock clicking back into place, leaving me alone with racing thoughts and a heartbeat that refused to slow down. His words echoed in my head on an endless loop. You're something special. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I explored every inch of the room looking for any possible escape route, but Damon hadn't been lying. This place was a fortress. The windows didn't open, the door was solid and locked from the outside, and even the air vents were too small for any escape attempt. I was well and truly trapped. By the time evening rolled around, I was climbing the walls with cabin fever and anxiety, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When Damon returned with dinner, I was ready for a fight. How long are you planning to keep me here? I demanded before he could even set down the tray. As long as necessary, he replied calmly. But I noticed he was watching me carefully, studying my every reaction. Nelson has 3 days to return what he stole and compensate me for my losses. After that, well, we'll see what happens. The casual way he delivered that threat made my blood run cold. And what about me? What happens to me after 3 days? He set the dinner tray down and turned to face me fully. That depends entirely on your brother's choices. And perhaps, he trailed off, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Perhaps on other factors as well. Other factors? I pressed, needing to understand what he meant. Damon moved closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Whether you prove to be more valuable to me alive and cooperative than as a simple bargaining chip. My mind raced, trying to decode the hidden meaning in his words. Are you threatening to kill me? No, he said immediately. And surprisingly, I believed him. I'm saying that this situation is more complicated than it initially appeared. You're more complicated than I anticipated. His hand lifted as if to touch my face again, but he caught himself and let it fall back to his side. Eat your dinner, Jones. Keep your strength up. You're going to need it. With that cryptic warning, he left again, and I was alone with my spiraling thoughts. I picked at the food, gourmet dishes that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, but couldn't taste any of it. My mind kept circling back to Damon's words, his looks, the way his carefully controlled exterior seemed to crack slightly whenever he was near me. What did he want from me? Why did he keep calling me special, intriguing, complicated? And most disturbing of all, why did some small traitorous part of me respond to his attention even while knowing how dangerous he was? Sleep eluded me again that night. I lay in that enormous bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what Nelson was doing. Was he even trying to save me? Did he care that his actions had landed me in this nightmare? Or was I just collateral damage in his endless pursuit of money and status? The questions multiplied in the darkness. And somewhere between fear and exhaustion, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I wasn't sure I knew my brother at all. And worse, I wasn't entirely certain I wanted to be rescued anymore. 3 days had passed since Damon had taken me. 3 long, confusing days where time seemed to move like honey, slow and thick and disorienting. Damon visited regularly, bringing meals and occasionally sitting in the chair by the window to work on his laptop, while I pretended to read books from the shelf he'd pointed out. Our interactions remained brief, loaded with tension I couldn't quite name, my anger gradually giving way to a strange, uncomfortable curiosity about this man who held my life in his hands. Today felt different though. I sensed it the moment Damon walked in, his expression darker than usual, his movements tense. Nelson finally made contact, he announced without preamble, and my heart lurched painfully in my chest. He wants you back, Damon continued, pouring himself a drink from the bar cart near the door like we were discussing the weather instead of my fate. The amber liquid swirled in the crystal glass, catching the afternoon light. Of course he does, I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. I'm his brother. We share blood. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Did Nelson actually care? Or was I just another possession he needed to reclaim? Damon's eyes fixed on me with laser focus. Do you honestly believe he cares about you? Really? He set his glass down with deliberate care and moved closer. If he truly valued you, he wouldn't have put you in this position in the first place. He would have considered the consequences before stealing from dangerous people. My jaw clenched as anger flared hot in my chest. You don't know anything about Nelson. You don't understand our relationship. But my voice wavered because deep in my gut, I knew Damon's words held more truth than I wanted to admit. I know him better than you think, Damon said quietly, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me feel exposed. He's selfish, Jones, driven by greed and ego. And you've never been his priority. You've always been an afterthought, something he dealt with when convenient. I shot to my feet, suddenly needing to move, to do something with the energy crackling through my body. You're wrong. You're completely wrong about him. But the conviction that should have backed up my words was notably absent, and we both knew it. The truth was that Nelson had always been focused on his deals, his connections, his climb up whatever ladder he was currently scaling. I'd spent years convincing myself he was protecting me by keeping me at arm's length. But maybe I'd just been lying to myself. Damon studied my face like he was reading a book written in a language only he understood. You've spent your entire life in his shadow, Jones. Have you ever stopped to think about what you actually want? What would make you happy instead of just existing in his orbit? I shoved him, frustration exploding out of me in a burst of physical action. Why do you even care? I'm just leverage to you. A tool to get what you want from Nelson. So why are you pretending to give a damn about my feelings? His hand shot out and caught my wrist, pulling me forward until there were only inches between us. You were just leverage, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. At first, that's all you were supposed to be. But now, I can't stop thinking about you, Jones. You're in my head constantly and I don't know what to do with that. His eyes held mine, dark and intense and filled with something that looked dangerously close to genuine emotion. My breath caught as awareness crashed over me. We were so close I could smell his cologne, woody and expensive with hints of something darker underneath. I could feel his heartbeat where our bodies nearly touched, could see the way his pupils dilated slightly as he looked at me. Dame, I managed to whisper, but I didn't know what I was trying to say. My mind had gone blank except for the overwhelming sensation of his presence consuming all my thoughts. He released me suddenly and stepped back like I'd burned him, his expression shuddering closed. Nelson arrives tomorrow. The exchange will happen, for the shipment he stole. He adjusted his jacket with sharp, precise movements. You'll get your old life back, Jones. This will all be over soon. But as he moved toward the door, something heavy and cold settled in my chest. I should have felt relief, should have been counting down the hours until freedom. But instead I felt loss, confusion. Something had shifted between us during these 3 days, something I couldn't name but couldn't deny either. Damon, I called out, my voice cracking slightly. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, his back rigid. Do you actually want to let me go? Do you want me to leave? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and complicated feelings neither of us knew how to address. Finally, without turning around, he answered in a flat, emotionless tone, yes. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut, and that single word felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. I sank back onto the bed, my mind a chaotic mess of conflicting emotions. Tomorrow I'd see Nelson again. Tomorrow I'd be free. I should have been celebrating, planning what I'd say to my brother, thinking about reclaiming my life. Instead, all I could think about was Damon's eyes in that moment before he'd pulled away. The way his voice had cracked almost imperceptibly when he'd admitted I was in his head. What was happening to me? Was this some kind of psychological phenomenon, getting attached to my captor, or was it something else, something real growing in the strange space between fear and fascination? The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the approaching deadline. When darkness fell and the city lights blazed to life below, I stood at the window and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would Nelson actually show up? Would he have the shipment Damon demanded? And if everything went according to plan and I walked away free, would I be relieved? Or would I regret leaving before understanding what was developing between me and this dangerous man who'd kidnapped me? Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, my mind replaying every interaction with Damon, searching for clues about what he was really thinking, really feeling. His words kept echoing. You're in my head constantly. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. Nelson certainly never had. In his world, I was background noise. Someone to check on occasionally, but never someone to actually see, to really pay attention to. But Damon saw me. He noticed things, and that attention, even in captivity, had awakened something in me I didn't know existed. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would change everything. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for what those changes might mean. Today was the day, the exchange. But I wasn't ready. From the moment I woke up, my chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone directly over my heart. Damon had barely spoken to me all morning. He was occupied with his men, finalizing every detail of the deal, checking and rechecking arrangements with military precision. I stood by the window watching the sky, gray clouds gathering, threatening rain that never quite fell. Everything looked dull, lifeless, matching the emptiness spreading through me. Evening arrived too quickly. Damon appeared in my doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Get ready, he said, his voice flat and emotionless, in a way that hurt more than I expected. Nelson arrives in 1 hour. This will all be over soon. I nodded slowly, feeling a lump form in my throat that I couldn't swallow past, and changed into fresh clothes. Simple jeans and a plain shirt, nothing special for this momentous occasion. When I emerged, Damon stood in the living room typing something on his phone, his jaw locked tight with tension. He looked up at me, and for just 1 second I saw something flicker across his features. Regret? Hesitation? Something that looked almost like pain? But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it, hidden behind his usual impenetrable mask. Let's go, he said simply. We descended to the basement parking where his collection of expensive, sleek vehicles lined the walls like sleeping predators. A black SUV waited for us, engine already purring. The drive was suffocatingly silent. Damon kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, never once glancing in my direction. I wanted desperately to say something. Anything, but the words tangled in my throat. Should I thank him for not hurting me? Say goodbye, or maybe admit something I wasn't ready to acknowledge even to myself? My mind felt chaotic, thoughts crashing into each other without forming coherence. Eventually we pulled up to an abandoned warehouse, the same location where this nightmare had begun. Nelson's car was already there, polished and expensive, just like everything else about him. My brother stepped out, tall and sharp-featured with that overconfident smirk permanently etched on his face. Jones, he called out casually, as if the past few days had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, as if I hadn't been held captive and terrified. Damon's hand closed around my arm, stopping my forward movement. The shipment first, he said to Nelson, his voice carrying cold authority that brooked no argument. Nelson's expression tightened with irritation, but he gestured sharply to his men. They rolled forward a large crate bound with heavy metal chains, the contents worth millions according to Damon. His security team moved in immediately, checking locks, verifying contents, ensuring no deception. Everything appeared legitimate. Now Jones, Nelson demanded, impatience dripping from every syllable. Damon's fingers slid slowly from my arm, the touch lingering like he was reluctant to break contact. I started walking toward Nelson, but each step felt impossibly heavy, like my body was actively resisting the movement. Halfway across the warehouse floor, caught between the two men who represented such different versions of my future, I stopped and turned back. Damon stood there watching me, tall, powerful, his face carefully blank. But his eyes followed my every movement with emotions I couldn't quite read but desperately wanted to understand. Jones, come on, Nelson shouted impatiently, annoyance clear in his tone. I took one last look at Damon, a silent goodbye to whatever strange connection had formed between us, and continued toward my brother. Nelson immediately grabbed my shoulder possessively. Let's get out of here. We've wasted enough time on this mess, he said, practically pushing me toward his car like I was an object to be retrieved rather than a person who'd just survived a traumatic ordeal. But as I reached for the car door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. If you want to come back, I'm here. Always. Damn it, my heart stuttered, then began racing. I looked at Nelson. He was already in the driver's seat starting the engine, typing something on his own phone. not even registering my presence beyond the fact that he'd successfully reclaimed his possession. Then I looked back at Damon. He was still standing there, still watching, waiting. My hand trembled against the cold metal of the car door. I could get in right now, return to my old life, slip back into Nelson's shadow, fade into invisibility again. Or I could choose something different. For myself. For the first time in my entire life, I could make a choice that was purely mine. The weight of that realization crashed over me like a wave. All those years living in Nelson's orbit, convincing myself that his neglect was protection, that being overlooked meant being safe. But these past 3 days with Damon had shown me something fundamentally different. What it felt like to be truly seen, to have someone's complete attention focused on me not as an obligation but as something they actively wanted. Damon had looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth paying attention to, like I was more than just Nelson's younger brother. Rain finally began to fall, light drops pattering against the warehouse roof and the cars below. The sound felt symbolic somehow, like the universe was marking this moment as significant. Nelson honked his horn impatiently. "Jones, what are you doing? Get in." But I couldn't move. My feet seemed rooted to the concrete, my hand still gripping the door handle, but making no move to pull it open. Every instinct I'd developed over years of following Nelson's lead, of being the compliant younger brother, was screaming at me to just get in the car and let this be over. But a different voice, quieter, newer, but somehow stronger, was asking me what I actually wanted. Not what Nelson expected. Not what would be easiest. What would make me happy? When would I stop merely existing and start actually living? Damon's message burned in my pocket like a promise, like an open door I could walk through if I was brave enough. The choice stretched before me, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Behind me stood safety in familiarity, the known quantity of a life half-lived. Ahead stood uncertainty, danger, but also the intoxicating possibility of being truly alive for the first time. The rain fell harder and I stood frozen between two futures, knowing that whatever I decided in this moment would change everything forever. I drew in a deep breath, feeling my chest expand with the enormity of what I was about to do. Nelson rolled down his window, rain beginning to dampen his expensive suit. "Jones, what's wrong with you? Get in the car now." His voice carried clear irritation, treating my hesitation like another inconvenience in his busy schedule. But I didn't move. My mind was racing through every interaction of the past 3 days. Every conversation with Damon. Every moment when he'd looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. These brief days had revealed something I'd been blind to for years. I'd been invisible in my own life. Nelson had never truly seen me, never paid real attention beyond obligation and duty. I released the car door and turned around, my decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "Jones," Nelson shouted, but I was already walking away from him, toward Damon. Each step felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying my entire life, building confidence with every footfall. When I reached him, surprise flickered across his usually controlled features, his eyes widening fractionally. "Why did you come back?" he asked quietly, voice barely above a whisper, genuine disbelief coloring his words. "Because," I said, keeping my voice steady and clear, despite my pounding heart, "I feel more like myself here. With you, I'm not just Nelson's brother. I'm Jones. For the first time, I actually exist as my own person instead of someone's shadow." Something softened in Damon's expression, a tenderness emerging that transformed his entire face. He took my hand gently, carefully, like I was something precious that might break if handled roughly. "Are you absolutely certain about this? This decision is permanent, Jones. Nelson won't forgive you for choosing me over him." I nodded, my determination absolute. "Yes. I want to stay here, with you. I feel alive for the first time in my life." Nelson's car peeled out with a screech of tires, his shouted words lost in the sound of the engine. I didn't listen, didn't care what threats or curses he hurled. My entire focus remained on Damon, on his eyes that now held warmth instead of calculated distance. He pulled me close, pressing his forehead against mine in an intimate gesture that made my breath catch. "You're insane," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Maybe." I smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that felt foreign on my face. But for the first time, I'm genuinely happy. For the first time, I'm making a choice for myself instead of just accepting what others decide for me. We returned to the penthouse together, but everything had transformed. The atmosphere felt completely different now. Lighter, charged with possibility rather than captivity. I was no longer a prisoner. I was here by choice, by my own free will. Damon showed me to a different room, better view where I could watch the sunrise, an unlocked door that symbolized my freedom, personal space that was truly mine. You can leave anytime you want, he said, meeting my eyes directly. But if you choose to stay, you're welcome here. I want you to stay. I looked at him, seeing appreciation and something deeper reflected in his gaze. I'm not going anywhere. This is my choice. That night, we went up to the rooftop. City lights sparkled below us like scattered diamonds across velvet, and cool wind brushed against my skin, refreshing after the day's tension. Damon handed me a glass of wine and stood close beside me, our arms barely touching. Did you ever imagine your life would turn out like this? He asked, curiosity and amusement mixing in his voice. I laughed softly. Never. I thought I'd end up with some boring office job, renting a cheap apartment, just existing without really living. But now, I wouldn't change any of this. He turned to look at me directly, his eyes intense and sincere. Neither would I. You've been an unexpected change in my life. But the best kind of change. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, just city sounds and whispered wind between us. Then Damon took my hand, squeezing gently. Jones. He said my name like it was something sacred, something that mattered. You came into my life like an accident, a mistake. But now, I can't imagine letting you go. I don't want to. My heart raced, butterflies erupting in my stomach. Then don't let me go, I whispered, feeling braver than I'd ever felt before. He turned me to face him fully, his arms wrapping around my waist and pulling me close against his body. You know who I am, what I do. My world is dangerous, dark, filled with violence and uncertainty. I don't know what I can offer you except myself. Just me, exactly as I am. Yes, I said, placing my hands on his chest where I could feel his heartbeat. And I don't care about the rest. I'm here by choice, to be with you. Because of you. He studied my eyes carefully, searching for doubt, fear, hesitation. But he only found certainty reflected back at him. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned his face closer to mine. My breath hitched in anticipation. Damon, quiet, he whispered, and then his lips touched mine, soft and hesitant at first, testing the waters. But when I responded, moving my lips against his, the kiss deepened into something passionate and real, full of everything we hadn't been able to say with words. When we finally separated, both breathing hard, our foreheads remained pressed together. Damon kissed my forehead tenderly, then my nose, then both of my cheeks with gentle reverence. Welcome home, Jones. This is permanent now. The words settled over me like a warm blanket, filling spaces inside me I hadn't realized were empty. Home. I'd never really had that before. Not in the true sense. Nelson's house had been a place I existed, but never somewhere I belonged. This penthouse, this rooftop, this moment with Damon, this felt like home in ways I'd never experienced. Like I'd finally found the place where I fit, where I was supposed to be all along. We stayed on the rooftop for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Damon told me about his childhood, about how he built his empire from nothing, about the loneliness of power. I shared my own stories growing up in Nelson's shadow, always feeling like an afterthought, the quiet desperation of being overlooked. With each shared confidence, the connection between us strengthened, deepened into something that felt unshakable. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting everything in shades of pink and gold, I realized something profound. Getting into that wrong car hadn't been a mistake at all. It had been fate, destiny, the universe conspiring to put me exactly where I needed to be. With Damon, finally home. The following weeks felt surreal, like living inside a dream I was afraid to wake from. I settled into life with Damon, gradually becoming part of his world in ways I'd never anticipated. He explained his business to me, the dangerous deals, the powerful enemies lurking in shadows, the complex web of alliances that kept everything balanced. But he never pressured me to get involved. It's your choice, he always said respectfully. I want to keep you safe above everything else. Yet I wanted to be involved. Wanted to understand every aspect of his life. I wanted to be beside him everywhere, in every situation. Then Nelson made contact. A threatening message arrived, dripping with anger and wounded pride. Send Jones back, or I'll burn your entire world to the ground. This is war, Damon. Damon simply laughed, a cold, confident sound that sent shivers down my spine. What exactly will you do, Nelson? You have no power here. Jones is staying because he wants to. He didn't choose you. He disconnected the call and turned to me, concern flickering in his eyes. Are you frightened? This could become serious. No, I said firmly, wrapping my hands around his. You're with me. I'm safe. He pulled me into a tight, protective embrace. Always. I won't ever let anything happen to you. But peace didn't last long. One night while we were having dinner, candles flickering, soft music playing in the background. Gunshots shattered the tranquility, loud, terrifying explosions of sound. Windows burst inward in a shower of glass. Damon immediately shoved me under the table, his body becoming my shield. Stay here. Don't move for any reason, he commanded, pulling out a gun and flicking off the safety with practiced ease. I couldn't just sit there helplessly. I tried to stand, panic overwhelming my common sense, but Damon pushed me back down forcefully. Jones, please. Listen to me. His voice carried genuine panic, the first time I'd ever heard him sound vulnerable. Scared for me. The shooting continued for several terrifying minutes. Chaos, shouting voices, more breaking glass. Then suddenly everything went silent, an eerie quiet that felt more frightening than the violence had been. Damon returned, slightly scratched with blood on his arm, but otherwise unharmed. Everything's fine, he said, helping me up and checking me frantically for injuries. You're not hurt? Nothing hit you? I'm okay, I assured him, touching his face gently. But you're bleeding. I'm fine. It was Nelson's people. They attempted to take you back by force. They thought they could intimidate us into compliance. My blood boiled with fury. Will this ever end? Damon cupped my face, his expression deadly serious. It will. I'll make certain of that. Tomorrow I'm ending this permanently. I'll deal with Nelson directly, face to face. The next morning, Damon formulated his final plan. We're confronting Nelson. One last meeting to resolve everything. One way or another. He held my hands, his grip firm but gentle. But I need your permission. He's your brother, your blood family, regardless of everything else. I struggled internally with the decision. Nelson, my blood relation, shared childhood memories, the only family I had left. But he'd never prioritized me, had actually endangered me through his selfish actions and complete disregard for consequences. Do it, I finally said decisively, whatever needs to happen. I'm standing with you. Damon arranged the final meeting at the warehouse, full circle back to where everything had started. Nelson arrived with heavily armed men flanking him. Return Jones to me, he demanded with his usual arrogance, acting like he still had the upper hand. Damon positioned me behind him protectively. Jones isn't going anywhere. This is his decision. Accept reality and move forward. Nelson stared at me, disbelief and fury mixing on his face. Have you lost your mind, Jones? This man is a criminal. A murderer. Don't you understand what you're doing? What about you? I shouted back, taking a step forward. You never cared about me. Only your deals, your money, your reputation. I waited for you, supported you constantly, but you never once truly saw me. Nelson's face contorted with anger. You don't understand, I was protecting you by keeping you distant. No, I interrupted, my voice strong and unwavering. I understand everything clearly for the first time. You're selfish, and I want freedom from that. I'm happy with Damon. Damon raised his gun, tension reaching unbearable levels. This ends now, Nelson. Final warning. But then Nelson lowered his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. Fine, he said bitterly, defeat heavy in his voice. You won, Damon. Jones is yours. I hope you're both satisfied. Damon lowered his gun, but remained alert and ready. What about the remaining shipment? It's yours. Everything is yours. Just let me leave. Nelson gave me one last look, regret, anger and disappointment all mingled together in his expression. Be happy, Jones. I genuinely hope you found what you were searching for. He turned and walked away with his men, disappearing from my life possibly forever. I stood there as emotions stormed through me. It was finished. Officially over. I was free. But alongside the relief came a strange heaviness, the weight of permanently severing family ties. We returned to the penthouse. Damon guided me to the couch and sat beside me, taking my hand. You made the right decision, he said quietly, reassurance in his tone. No, I said as tears began rolling down my cheeks beyond my control. I just abandoned my brother. I'll probably never see him again. Damon pulled me into a tight, warm embrace. You chose yourself. You chose your own happiness. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. I cried against his shoulder, releasing everything, years of accumulated pain, loneliness, feeling invisible and unimportant. When I finally calmed down, Damon lifted my face, his thumbs gently wiping away my tears. Now we're both free. No past holding us back, only future ahead, our future together. I smiled, genuine, hopeful, excited for what was coming. Together, both of us. He kissed me slow, deep, full of promises and love. When we separated, he whispered vulnerably and sincerely, I love you, Jones. This is the first time I've ever said those words to anyone and truly meant them with everything I am. My heart felt like it might burst from overwhelming emotion. I love you too, Damon, so incredibly much. We spent that night and every night after together, building something real and beautiful from the wreckage of our complicated beginning. One wrong car had completely changed my entire life. But perhaps it hadn't been wrong at all. Perhaps it was exactly what I needed. Destiny disguised as a mistake. A mafia boss. A dangerous man living in shadows and violence. But for me, he was home. The place I belonged, and I had finally found where I was always meant to be. With the person who saw me completely and loved me anyway. Our story had begun with fear and captivity, but it would continue with choice, freedom, and love that neither of us had expected to find.